Hello and welcome to I Nurture videos. In this video, we will discuss an overview of semantic elements. At the end of this video, you will be able to explain semantic elements and its usage in HTML5 documents. Semantic elements are the elements with a meaning. A semantic element describes its meaning to both the browser and the developer. These elements help search engine index and classify a document appropriately, which in turn makes internet search engines meaningful and effective. HTML5 elements contain other elements. For example, here is a header element used to contain an H1 heading element and a paragraph element. These elements can also tell you something about how these elements are being used. Here's an example to show what I mean. These elements are contained within a header element, so we know they are being used as header information. The navigation element contains some links. The main element contains the main content of the web page, and the footer element contains footer information. So these new elements can make it easier for us to understand the content of a web page. Now let's start building a web page. We'll start with a basic template. This web page is about news, and so all title in it news. Now in the body section, let's add a header element. The header element can be used to group elements together that are used for introductory content of a section. In this case, the introductory content is for the whole page inside the header. I've added an H1 heading element for the name or title of the website. I've also added a paragraph element to give description of the type of news. Let's take a look at this in the browser. Use the navigation element to add a navigation section. This element is primarily intended for major navigation blocks, and so you don't need to use it for every link on web page. We are using it here because it will contain the main length of our website. This element is an unordered list element, and it's not new to HTML5. It's used to represent a list of items, and in this case, we are using it for a list of links. A list item element is used for each item within the unordered list, and I placed a link inside of each of them. It's common practice to use an unordered list for a group of navigation links. This is what it looks like in the browser. Here is the navigation section. These markers are displayed because we are using an unordered list for the links. Next, let's add main element. This is where the main content of the web page will be located for this web page. The main content will have two sections, one for local news and one for national news. So let's add two section elements. A section element is used to group together a generic block of related content. We are using the first section for local news. So let's begin the section by using a heading element to identify it. Now add an article element. An article element is used for a complete or self-contained composition. So independent content that can stand all on its own is suitable to be put into an article element. We are using it for a self-contained news story. A header element can be used inside of an article element. So let's use one to group together a heading element, and a paragraph element will use the heading element for the news story title, and the paragraph element for the author and date of the story. Now, we'll add paragraph elements after the header element for the news story itself. Let's take a look at this in the browser. This is the content of the section element and this is the content of the article element now. Let's add a second news story. This has the same elements as above but with a different news story. Let's look at this in the browser. This is the first news story and this is the second one we are using. Our second section element for national news will begin this section with a heading element to identify it. Now let's add two new stories just like we did above. This is what it looks like in the browser. Here is the local news section with our two new stories and here is the national news section with two news stories. Now we are going to add content that will be used for our sidebar. We'll use the aside element for this. The aside element is used for content that is separate from but related to the content around it. So what you put inside this element depends on where it's located. If it were located inside of one of the article elements, then it should be related to that specific article. Since we are using it outside of the article, elements directly in the body section, it's related to the web page as a whole. We are using it to ask people for news tips. Other uses for this element can include things like advertising or groups of navigation elements. The aside element is frequently styled as a sidebar, but it does not have to be. Now, let's look at it in the browser. Here's the content of the aside element. Now let's add a footer to the web page and we can do this by using a footer element. There are various things that you might want to put in a footer. For example, you could use it for copyright information or links to related web pages or contact information, but you are not limited to these things. Our footer element is located directly in the body section and so it represents a footer for the whole page. We could have also placed a footer element inside of an article element which could represent footer information specifically for that article. Let's take a look at this in the browser. This is our footer information. We are done now with the basic structure of the web page. Let's have a quick recap on what we discussed. Semantic elements contain other elements within the element. Semantic elements are the elements with specified meaning. Thank you for watching this video.